One of the most wanted terrorists in the world, the number 2 in the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Abdul Rehman Makki, was today blacklisted by the United Nations Security Council. It is a significant move because his prescribing was put on hold by China, Pakistan's fair weather friend, for the last 6 months. By doing what it did today, by lifting that technical hold, is China sending a softening signal to India? More importantly, will this help bring the likes of other prescribed terrorists, Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar, and others who are yet to be prescribed by the UN Sanctions Committee 1267? Will they finally face justice for various acts of terror carried out here in India? But first, the story.
We welcome the decision of the UN Security Council's ISIL and Al-Qaida Sanctions Committee to list Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist Abdul Rehman Makki. India remains committed to pursuing a zero-tolerance approach to terrorism.
Those who are involved and who are complicit in acts of terrorism should be brought to book. Terrorists are made accountable for their actions.
Backdrop, realizing that this doesn't pay any dividends for them because terrorism is now, countering terrorism is now increasingly becoming a global norm.
So Abdul Rehman Makki has been unleashing terror. He's been involved in conspiracy or the actual plotting of a number of terrorist attacks here in India for the last 20 years plus. In 2000, that's when his name first came to light. This was the Red Fort attack in which 6 Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists opened indiscriminate fire on police forces. Then in 2008, in Rampur in Uttar Pradesh, in that attack, 5 Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists attacked a CRPF camp. 7 CRPF personnel were killed. Then, of course, the most infamous for his role in plotting and conspiring in the 2008-2611 Mumbai attacks. More than 160 people died. It was the worst terror attack on Indian soil. In 2018, in Srinagar, there was an attack on a CRPF camp in which 1 trooper died. This was a suicide squad attack that happened in Srinagar. Then in 2018, there was the Baramulla attack in which 3 civilians were shot dead by Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists. Same year, in 2018, there was an attack on the famous journalist Sujat Bukhari, who is from the Kashmir Times. His 2 guards, including a personal security officer, were shot dead. Abdul Rehman Makki was behind that. And in 2018, the Bandipora attack in which 4 army soldiers were killed while trying to thwart an infiltration bid. Now, why is this sanctioning, this proscribing of Abdul Rehman Makki such an important thing? The UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee is the highest body, and they've gone through a series of charges against Abdul Rehman Makki. Number 1, he's wanted by the Indian government for numerous terror attacks that I just enlisted a moment ago. Number 2, he's associated with ISIL as well as with Al-Qaida. So it's not just his connection and his central role in Lashkar-e-Taiba, but also his connections with these 2 proscribed organizations, ISIL and Al-Qaida. He's participated in terror financing, in planning, plotting, conspiring some of the biggest terror attacks that have taken place in India. Number 4, he has facilitated or directly perpetrated many terror acts in India over the last 20 years. And charge 5, he has recruited actively a number of young jihadists to carry out acts of terror. And number 6, he's actively supported the activities of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, whether it is the front, the so-called charity front, the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, or other activities carried out by the Lashkar-e-Taiba. So what does the blacklisting of Abdul Rehman Makki actually mean? How will this affect both his operations as well as operations of the Lashkar-e-Taiba? The implication number 1 is that this will put severe restrictions on Makki's ability to travel, both domestically, within Pakistan, and also, more importantly, foreign travel. He will not be able to leave the country. Implication number 2, it blocks the Lashkar-e-Taiba from collecting funds. There are financial restrictions that will be put on the Lashkar-e-Taiba as well as on Abdul Rehman Makki to be able to collect funds for terror financing. Number 3, he cannot collect funds even in the name of charity or proselytizing or evangelizing in the name of Islam. Even that would be curbed by today's sanctioning. Implication number 4 are his financial assets, whether they are homes, whether they are assets in bank lockers, it will all be frozen. He will not have access to both liquid and illiquid assets. And finally, implication number 5, it would also mean he cannot be seen carrying any weapons of any sort. He will not be given regular gun licenses, even if he were to apply for one. And he cannot be seen as dealing in any kind of weapons trade. This is not the first time that China has blocked a known and dreaded terrorist from being proscribed by the United Nations Security Council. It's been on a blocking spree since 2009, since right after the 26/11 attacks. Number 1, Masood Azhar, the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief. He was put on a technical hold multiple times, first in 2009, then in 2016 after the Pathankot attack, then in 2017, and then finally in March 2019 after the Pulwama attack. Basically, China put it on a technical hold, saying there needs to be more time to assess information. Finally, after I think 5 attempts, China accepted the proposal to proscribe Masood Azhar in May of 2019. Abdul Rauf Asghar, again, somebody who was a relative of Masood Azhar, his younger brother. He's the deputy chief of the Jaish-e-Mohammed. His listing was also put on technical hold in August of 2022. Sajid Mir, the Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist, his proscribing at the United Nations Sanctions Committee was blocked. China blocked it in September of 2022. There is Talha Hafiz Saeed, again relative of and the son of the Lashkar-e-Taiba chief Hafiz Mohammed Saeed. His name was also blocked in the listing process that happened at the Sanctions Committee in October of 2022. And Shahid Mahmood is an LET terrorist whose name also got blocked in October of 2020. So let's go across to our guests who are joining us. Professor Brahmacharani is a strategic affairs expert, Hamid Khan, senior Pakistan journalist, and Professor Victor Gao is a chair professor at the Suzhou University. Brahmacharani, let me start with you first. China had put the listing of Abdul Rehman Makki on technical hold for the last 6 months. They lifted that last night, and now Makki is prescribed and blacklisted by the Sanctions Committee. Why do you think China has done that? Is that sending a signal of some kind of softening, or at least desire to have some kind of normal relations with India, given all that's happened over the last couple of years?
Well, it's good that China has lifted a technical hold, but this doesn't suggest a change in Chinese policy. China has long shielded Pakistan from UN censure over its links with terrorist groups, including blocking Pakistan-based terrorists from being placed on the UN sanctions list, as you pointed out. Even at the FATF, China protects Pakistan. In fact, China has repeatedly praised Pakistan for its commitment to fight terrorism. It never condemned the involvement of 10 Pakistani gunmen in staging the horrific Mumbai terrorist attacks. But when Chinese nationals become victims of terrorism in Pakistan, as when 9 Chinese dam workers were killed in a bus explosion in July 2021, Beijing changes its tune temporarily and demands Pakistan crack down on terrorists.
Okay.
The fact is that Pakistan's descent into violent jihadism has aided China's designs. For example, it has allowed China to deploy thousands of regular PLA troops in Pakistan-held Kashmir.
Okay.
And in fact, because of these attacks on Chinese nationals that have happened, as in July 2021, China has sought to use such attacks to further expand its strategic role in a client state by citing the failure of Pakistani security to protect its assets and citizens.
Okay, so let me ask Hamid Khan, is the lifting of the technical hold and the prescribing of this man, Makki, a realization by all countries, including China, which always used to either block it or veto such moves, that when their nationals are being attacked, and Brahmacharani outlined a couple of instances where Chinese nationals were attacked by these terrorist groups, is this a sign that China is also wanting to send a signal to Pakistan that, terrorism directed against Chinese nationals, as it may, is also not acceptable, and therefore China can't be seen as backing or protecting a terrorist, a well-known terrorist?
Thank you very much, Zaka. Actually, I mean, China's stance is quite principled based on the whenever he put a halt on any ban, it was based on the incomplete information. So if China believed that this information was complete against Makki, so they did not object it. So there is nothing unusual in it. And secondly, I would like to remind you when you talk about the war of terror, I mean, Pakistan is the only one who had fought for the world in the war against terror, and we have given over 10,000 lives of our soldiers, over 70,000 lives of our civilians in last 20 years. And then, I mean...
No, but Mr. Khan, the question that I asked you about Chinese nationals and the risk that they are facing as a result of which, as Professor Chalani said, there are even PLA troops on ground in Pakistan in certain areas to offer protection to these Chinese engineers and other workers on these projects.
I would like to complete what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah,
secondly,
go ahead.
Pakistan is clear that what India's role in spreading terrorism in the subcontinent. And we have seen that a convicted from International Court of Justice is Kulbhushan Yadav, and he is one of the biggest terrorists as well, who has plotted several attacks within Pakistan, and they were terrorist attacks were caused many
Mr. Hamid Khan, we can go on this whole same rhetoric over and over again. The matter went to the ICJ. I will please refer you to that decision that the bench at the ICJ arrived at. But Professor Victor Gao, if China wants normal relations with India, it has to resolve what is going on at the border over the last 2 years plus. And the onus to do that is on China, because it's China that tried to change the status quo. India responded to that move. So as the Foreign Minister of India, Jaishankar, said, ties are not normal right now. And whether or not you lift a technical hold against the Pakistani terrorists, that's not going to change until the border situation changes.
Thank you very much for having me. Allow me to emphasize several points. One is that indeed there are territorial disputes between China and India. Secondly, these disputes were not created by India nor by China. These disputes were created by the British Indian colonists, which had their own geopolitical dreams, and they artificially created the boundaries which were never consulting with China and were never recognized by China. Therefore, neither China nor India should be held hostage by the bad legacies left by the British Indian colonists. We should have enough wisdom to resort to negotiation and diplomacy and eventually find a mutually acceptable solution to the border disputes.
Okay.
Now, this is the only right way for both China and India, the two great countries in the world, each with a population of about 1.4 billion people, to talk about peace and negotiation and dialogue rather than mongering for war.
But Professor Gao, surely, I mean, the British left India 75 years ago. They left China even earlier than that. Surely it wouldn't have taken 75 years for both our countries to sort out these border issues. Like I said, the latest provocation and the provocations over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years has been because A, China wants to keep the pot boiling, as it were, and B, there is a power differential which China would like to continue to keep as it sees in its favor. That differential is closing in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of military power projection, but China would like to keep that differential in its favor. That's why we are having this from time to time.
Absolutely not. You'll know for sure that China has altogether 14 land neighboring countries. China has signed border treaties with 12 of them. There are only 2 countries which have not signed border treaties with China. One is India, and the other one is Bhutan, which is under India's control. Therefore, China wants to sign border treaties with India as well as Bhutan in peace, and whatever disputes there are, border issues between China and India, I'm sure if we use wisdom and resort to diplomacy and dialogue, we will find a mutually acceptable
So let me ask
way.
Professor Chalani, how do you respond to Professor Gao and other Chinese who say that China had, the China-Russia boundary problem, for example, was far more complicated than the China-India boundary problem. Even Bhutan, a couple of days ago, there was a statement from the Bhutan government saying that they've almost reached an agreement with China on their boundary question with China. So how does that, one then explain as to why the India-China boundary has not still been resolved?
Well, first, as a matter of principle, China signs border agreements with countries that are in decline. The China-Russia agreement on the border was signed when Russia was adrift. Russia's very future was uncertain, and the agreement was largely on China's terms. With India, China cannot impose its terms. That's the main reason why the India-China frontier remains unresolved. An unresolved Himalayan frontier also works to China's advantage. India has been willing to negotiate a settlement on the Himalayan frontier. Under successive prime ministers, India has shown flexibility. But the fact is that the Chinese say one thing and then do the opposite. At one time, Deng Xiaoping talked about a trade-off, a trade-off between rival claims in the West and the East. But actually, nothing concrete happened from the Chinese side.
Okay.
So, for China, and coming back to the issue that we're discussing, Pakistan, it's not just the frontier. It's the fact that China regards Pakistan as a strategic bulwark against its long-standing rival India.
All right.
And because India is a long-standing rival for China, that's the reason why China wouldn't like to settle the border with India.
Okay.
Once the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia became a friend and ally of China, and Russia was in decline and China was on the rise, that's how the China-Russia border settlement happened.
Question. Okay, let me ask Hamid Khan, coming back to the Makki sanctioning, in response to that, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shahbaz Sharif, says, look, we've fought 3 wars with India. What did we get? We got poverty in return. There are articles in mainstream newspapers today in Pakistan saying that there is a very real economic differential and power differential between India and Pakistan. And given all the viral videos we've seen of the problem around finding atta and, the cost of essentials going through the roof, is there a realization in Pakistan that successive governments have not kept the interests of that country at heart? And clearly, India has now managed to pursue its own independent foreign policy. Imran Khan keeps talking about it, how India, is close to the West, is close to America, but still continues to buy oil from Russia.
Yes, before answering your question, I would like to say something what Professor Victor was saying, that, China has resolved their issues of, boundaries or territory with almost all neighboring countries. While in case of India, India has disputes of boundaries with all of its neighbors, most of the neighbors, whether it is Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China. So I think India needs to look into their, policy. They can link to the world or to the neighbors.
Can you please answer my question of what Shahbaz Sharif said? I have very limited time. I need to wrap up. Yeah.
I'll come to that. Okay. Yes, there is no doubt there is an economical crisis at the moment in the country. But let me reassure you again and again that there is no chances of default, what Indian media is claiming. Yes, Pakistan would love to have a good relations with India. It is in the benefit and for the...
All right, look, I'm completely out of time. All I'll say is this, that I think this whole IMF and Pakistan back and forth has been going on for the better part of the last almost 10 years now. There is no foreseeable sort of bailout, as it were, and I don't see that changing even after the elections later on this year. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for tuning in. In a moment, Maria Shakil joining you with News Epicenter.